My name is Elliot Raines. I spent 3 years building Argus, an AI system meant to protect truth, only to discover my own CEO had stripped my name from it and pitched it as is. It felt like being erased while still breathing. But I didn't stay silent. I fought back, with a clause he forgot he signed. If you've ever been pushed aside for doing the right thing, listen to the whole story. Then tell me, was I right to risk it all just to protect the truth? I need your honest advice. It was one of those Seattle mornings where the sky couldn't decide if it was going to rain or just hang a low gray mist over everything. I remember the way the light filtered through the blinds that day, washed out, tired, like it already knew something I didn't. That was the morning everything shifted. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking into a different kind of Monday. The kind you carry with you for the rest of your life. My hand wrapped instinctively around the coffee pot, still half full from yesterday. I poured it into the chipped mug I always used, white with a fading University of Washington logo, and stood by the window as the rain started to speckle the glass. The apartment was silent. No music, no news. Just the sound of Seattle waking up under a blanket of fog and soft regret. I arrived at the office around 7:45, early enough to pretend I had a choice in how the day would go. Virion Dynamics was a sharp-looking place, tucked inside one of those refurbished brick buildings in Fremont, polished concrete floors, standing desks, abstract wall art that tried too hard to say nothing at all. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Inside, though, there was always this tension, a kind of practiced politeness, like we were all walking through someone else's house and didn't want to leave fingerprints. I'd been with Virion for 5 years, long enough to know how things worked, and even longer to know when something wasn't right. The younger guys called me Uncle Eli. They meant it as a compliment, I think. I was the one they came to when a bill broke or when the model started spitting out garbage. I didn't mind. I'd always believed in staying useful. Quietly, steadily useful. That morning, I logged in and saw an email from the internal comms team, one of those all-hands prep threads for a pitch I hadn't been looped into. I opened the attachment. A slide deck. Title, Argus, Scalable Deepfake Detection for Enterprise Security. Argus. My project. The one I'd been nursing for the past 3 years like a second spine. Every algorithm, every line of core logic had passed through my fingers at some point. But my name wasn't on any of the slides. Not on the architecture diagram. Not in the version control summary. Not even under contributors. The final slide hit me the hardest. Prepare for demo with Archstone Ventures. Marshall will pitch. Marshall. My CEO. My former collaborator. My supposed friend. I just sat there, staring at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, but not typing a damn thing. The room felt colder all of a sudden. My chest was tight in a way I couldn't explain. I thought, maybe it's just a mistake. Maybe it's a placeholder deck. Maybe someone copied the wrong version. But even as I reached for those explanations, I could feel something else rising. Not panic. Not yet. Just something raw. Like a cut you didn't notice until you saw the blood. I shut the laptop and stood up. I couldn't sit there another second. I walked 2 blocks down to Stella's Grounds, the old coffee shop I used to hide in when deadlines stacked too high, or when Marshall and I used to brainstorm. The place hadn't changed. Same scratched-up tables, same chipped mugs, same jazz humming softly under the conversations of tired-looking regulars. I ordered an espresso, sat by the fogged-up window, and just breathed. It came back to me slowly. The nights we worked on Argus. The whiteboard sessions that bled into midnight, the pizza boxes, the arguments over ethical parameters. And Marshall, pacing with that wild look in his eyes, saying, "You're the heart of this, Elliot. I'm just the guy in the meetings." I'd believed him. Hell, I'd believed in him. I stared through the window, watching rain bead and streak down the glass like it was erasing the outside world. And all I could think was, how fast trust unravels when silence replaces acknowledgement. Not just the absence of credit, but the active removal of it. That's a different kind of theft. By the time I got back to the office, the glass-walled conference room was closed. Marshall stood inside, talking to the leadership team, gesturing like he was already a man who owned the future. He caught my eye through the glass, gave a brief nod, and looked away before I could read anything in his expression. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop again, but not to code. Not that morning. I clicked into the Argus project folder, then down into legal, where a very specific PDF waited, a document I'd uploaded over a year ago. Something that, at the time, Marshall had signed without reading. We were in a rush then. He trusted me. Or maybe he just didn't think he'd ever have to answer for it. I opened the file and read the clause again, word for word. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. Not exactly. But I knew one thing, with more clarity than I'd felt in years. I didn't sleep much that night. My body went through the motions, shower, toast, feed the cat, but my mind was stuck somewhere between suspicion and something darker. By the time I got back to the office the next morning, the coffee in my hand was cold and untouched. I went straight to my terminal and pulled up the Argus repository. It took about 5 minutes to see it. My name, my contributions, were gone from the commit logs. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight. The commit history had been rewritten. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a formatting issue or some intern learning get the hard way. Someone had deliberately rewritten the code history to make it look like I'd never been there. I clicked deeper, digging through archived emails, trying to trace the trail I knew I'd left behind. There had been an email, an important one, 8 months ago. I'd outlined the architecture of the predictive module and included the proposed patent clause. I remembered the subject line. I remembered Marshall's one-line reply. Got it, let's move forward. But now it was gone. Not just missing from my inbox. Gone from the server backup too. If I hadn't printed a copy and saved it in my encrypted offline drive at home, well, I guess I wouldn't be sitting here telling the story. That was the moment it really settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't oversight. This was a surgical erasure. And I was the one being cut out. I sat there for a long time, watching the cursor blink like it was waiting for me to catch up. That morning, Marshall had scheduled an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. I went because not showing up would only raise eyebrows. Half the company squeezed into the too bright glass box, laptops balanced on laps, the air thick with startup optimism and anxiety. Marshall stood at the front in his tailored navy blazer, sleeves rolled just so, and flashed the kind of smile he used when he wanted people to forget they were tired, underpaid, and replaceable. Virion is moving into an aggressive growth phase, he began. We've secured initial interest from Archstone Ventures. They're excited about Argus and its potential to reshape enterprise trust in visual data. There was a small round of applause. I didn't clap. We'll be focusing all engineering and marketing bandwidth on the pitch, he continued. This is a rare chance to scale fast. We're going all in. I raised my hand. Not high. Just enough that he couldn't pretend not to see it. What's the role of the core technical team in the pitch presentation? I asked. I kept my tone neutral. Marshall paused. Then he smiled, like I just asked him how to spell I. You don't need to worry about that, Elliot, he said smoothly. You're the one who built the engine. I'm the one who knows how to drive the car in front of investors. The room went quiet. Not because it was a great metaphor, but because we all knew what it meant. He'd just drawn a line. I was on the wrong side of it. Later that afternoon, I walked down to Stella's grounds. I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go back to my desk. I just needed somewhere quiet where the furniture didn't lie to you. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped in. The place was nearly empty, just the clink of ceramic cups and the soft murmur of Miles Davis on the speakers. And there, by the corner window, sat Lorna Beck. She looked the same as always, blazer over a turtleneck. Glasses slid halfway down her nose, reading some dense policy brief like it was a mystery novel. I hadn't seen her in almost a year, but we'd kept in touch off and on ever since that AI Ethics Summit in Portland. She looked up and smiled without surprise. You look like hell, she said gently. I chuckled, the sound dry and flat. Feel worse. She gestured to the seat across from her, and I sank into it like someone who hadn't sat down all day. I think someone's rewriting history, I said after a beat. And I'm being edited out. She didn't blink. Do you still have the first draft? I nodded. Encrypted. Printed. Multiple places. She sipped her coffee. Then don't panic. But don't wait too long either. I lost everything once because I thought decency would prevail. Turns out, decency doesn't sign checks. We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, just the kind of quiet that forms between two people who understand things without needing to spell them out. Before I left, she put a hand on my forearm. Be careful, Elliot. People who steal ideas usually don't stop at ideas. I walked back in the rain, the wind picking up, my coat too thin for the weather. But I wasn't cold. I was awake. That night, I opened my home terminal and found a file, a sign clause I'd embedded into the internal invention disclosure over a year ago. A tiny, legally binding line that required dual consent for any commercialization of Argus's core engine. I didn't go to Marshall's office angry. I'd already done that years ago in a different life with a different boss, and all it gave me was high blood pressure and a reputation for being difficult. No, this time I went quiet, calm, and with the document in my hand. His door was open, which was rare. I stood there for a second, watching him type something furiously on his laptop. His posture was straight-backed, like he was trying to physically rise above the pressure he'd created. He looked up when he saw me. Elliot, he said, like he was surprised I still worked here. I need 5 minutes, I said, stepping in and shutting the door behind me. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and gave me that salesman smile of his. Of course. What's on your mind? I didn't waste time. I handed him the printed document, highlighted clause and all. He scanned it quickly, then chuckled under his breath. This thing, he said, tapping the paragraph with the back of his pen. Eli, come on. We're a Delaware corporation. IP belongs to the company by default. That's just standard. You know that. I nodded. I do. But I also know this clause was signed. It wasn't flagged. It was part of the official disclosure package filed with legal last year. He dropped the smile. His eyes flicked from the page to my face and back again. You're serious about this? I'm not here to argue law, I said. I'm here to remind you that you signed something. You may have done it quickly. Maybe you didn't read every line. But you signed it. His jaw twitched the way it did when he was holding something back. I don't want you to make this personal. I stared at him. You made it personal when you erased my name. That hit. He looked away, muttered something I didn't catch. I'm trying to get us funded, he finally said. You think this is easy? You think Archstone cares about who wrote what line of code? They want a story, Elliot. They want a face. You're great at building things, but you're not exactly headline material. It was meant to sting, and it did, but not the way he thought. I'm not here for headlines, I said quietly. I'm here to do work that matters. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were co-conspirators again. Don't ruin this for both of us. I stepped back. You already did. I left his office without another word. The next morning, I got the official company-wide email. Team reorganization, Argus leadership realignment. The language was polished, harmless on the surface. But I knew what it meant. I'd been reassigned, moved to strategic technical advisor, which sounded important, but came with no access to the core project files and no decision-making role. I'd been benched. My ID badge still worked, but I couldn't open the Argus repo anymore. The system bounced me out like I was some stranger trying to break in. It was strange how fast it all happened. Like the company had been waiting for a reason to push me aside, and I'd handed it to them on a silver platter. That afternoon, I ran into Jonas in the restroom. He was one of the newer engineers, young, brilliant, jittery in a way that made you want to protect him from whatever this business would do to him. He looked around before speaking, like the walls had ears. I saw what happened, he whispered. It's not right. I didn't say anything. I mean, people know, he went on. But nobody wants to say anything. Everyone's afraid they'll be next. He looked down, flushed the sink twice, and left. I stood there, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older than I remembered, but not broken. Not yet. That night, I went home and took the old Bible off the shelf. It still had my wife's handwriting in the margins, soft, looping notes she used to make during Sunday sermons. I opened it at random, and the verse hit me like a brick. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about how easy it is to rationalize silence. To tell yourself you're being mature, strategic, professional, when really you're just afraid. I took out my journal, the same one I'd used for the first ideas of Argus, and wrote one line across the page. Silence now is complicity. I closed the book and sat in the quiet. The cat jumped onto the couch beside me, purring against my arm like it knew I needed an anchor. I didn't have a full plan yet. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. Not again. Not this time. Not to something I built with my own hands. There are decisions you make with your gut and others you make with your feet. I hadn't turned in any resignation letter. I hadn't said a word to HR. But the way I was moving told me everything I needed to know. I was already halfway out the door. 2 months before any of this exploded, I'd filed something with an organization called Open Ethics AI. They're a nonprofit watchdog that supports open source initiatives in artificial intelligence, sort of like Creative Commons, but with teeth. I submitted the Argus Core engine under a public licensing clause, tagging it for scheduled release if left unchallenged for 90 days. I didn't do it out of paranoia. Back then, it was more of a precaution, like locking your bike in a neighborhood that seemed fine during the day. The timer was almost up. 7 days from now, the core algorithm, the part Marshall had so neatly tucked into his investor deck, would go public. Once it did, no one could claim exclusive ownership. No hedge fund, no startup, no fast-talking CEO. I sat in the garage that night, the place where I'd done most of the early work on Argus before we moved things to the company server. There were old notebooks on the shelves, marker-streaked whiteboards, still faintly readable in spots, and 3 prototypes in various states of disassembly on the workbench. I ran my hand across the surface, remembering how it all began, not with investors or PR decks, but with late nights and real questions. What if no one could trust what they saw on a screen anymore? What if truth had to be verified before it could be believed? That was the fire behind Argus, not profit, not market share. I picked up my phone and called Lorna. She picked up on the second ring. No hello. Just, I figured I'd hear from you. You busy? I asked. Always. But not too busy for this. I told her what I'd done. About the submission. About the timer. About how I wasn't sure if flipping that switch was too much. She was quiet a beat. Then she said, you think it's too extreme to stop someone from stealing your life's work? It's not that, I said. I don't want this to be about revenge. Then don't make it about him, she said gently. Make it about not erasing yourself. I sat with that for a second. She wasn't pushing me, just holding a mirror up, letting me see what I'd already known deep down. I used to believe people would correct themselves if given enough time, she added. But some folks, especially the ones who get ahead by taking shortcuts, they only stop when someone puts up a wall. I thought I was building something that could protect truth, I said. Now I feel like I have to use it to protect myself. That's the irony, she said. Sometimes, defending the truth means using the very thing you built to do it. She told me about her own break years ago, how she left a company quietly after a similar betrayal. I didn't fight, she admitted. I told myself walking away was the high road. But it haunted me, because silence didn't fix anything. It just let the wrong story take over. I didn't say much after that. We said our goodbyes, and I sat in the garage for a long time after the call ended, listening to the refrigerator hum inside and the distant buzz of rain starting to fall again. Later, I went back inside and started packing, not dramatically, just methodically. Old notebooks, a framed photo from a company retreat, the flash drive with my local backups. I unplugged the model prototype I'd kept at my desk and wrapped the cord neatly. These weren't things I'd need for another job. They were just pieces I couldn't leave behind. I wasn't bitter. I thought I would be. But I wasn't. I was tired, yes. Worn. Disappointed. But not angry in the way I used to get angry. What I felt was deeper. Like mourning. You build something with everything you have. You give it your weekends, your evenings, your best ideas at 2 in the morning. You fight for it in meetings and defend it in code reviews. And then one day, someone repackages it with a smile and strips your name from the cover. That doesn't just bruise your ego. It cuts something closer to your spine. I stood in the doorway of the garage and looked out into the misty street, lights smudging through the fog. No dramatic music. No lightning strike. Just a man realizing he's not going to let this story end the way someone else wants it to. I didn't know how the company would react once the Argus code went public. I didn't know what Marshall would do when he saw the license and understood what it meant. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't apologize for telling the truth. And I wouldn't pretend this wasn't deliberate. I wasn't angry, just sad for the people who still believe intelligence is something you can steal without leaving a trail. The office that morning felt like a live wire. Everyone was walking faster, talking quieter, glancing at one another like the walls might echo. Even the air smelled different, too much cologne and anticipation. The marketing team had set up cameras in the main conference room, checking lighting and angles like we were about to film a product launch on national television. Marshall showed up in a navy suit I'd never seen him wear before. It was sharp, probably tailored. He was grinning, shaking hands, rehearsing his lines under his breath like an actor getting into character. That man could charm a cat off a fish cart when he wanted to. I wasn't invited to the pitch. That didn't surprise me. I sat 2 rooms down in one of the secondary workspaces, the kind they call focus pods on the tour brochure. The glass walls weren't soundproof, but they were good at making people forget you were there. I watched the conference room from a distance, the outlines of heads and laptops moving behind the frosted glass. I could see Marshall gesturing. His hands always did half the talking. I wasn't angry about being excluded. Not anymore. Sitting there, watching him, I realized I had nothing left to prove to him, or to anyone in that room. About 20 minutes into the presentation, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a personal text. It was a company-wide email from OpenEthics AI. I opened it. Subject: immediate attention. Intellectual property disclosure regarding Argus. It wasn't just me. I could hear notifications going off across the office. That chain reaction chiming of unread messages hitting inboxes at once. Then I heard footsteps. Fast ones. Someone from legal jogged past my pod without even pretending not to be panicked. I clicked into the email again and read every line carefully, even though I already knew what it said. Argus's core engine had been registered under a shared source license and submitted for public release. The code would be published in 72 hours. Any attempts to claim exclusive rights without joint consent would be considered a violation of ethical standards and licensing law. They'd sent it to the entire board and the investors. I sat back in my chair, closed my laptop slowly, and waited. Not 5 minutes later, Marshall stormed into the pod, flung a folder onto the desk, and shut the glass door behind him. He didn't sit down. "What the hell did you do, Elliot?" I didn't flinch. I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "I protected the work." His voice dropped a notch, trying to regain control. "You're going to destroy everything we built over a technicality?" I stood up slowly. "It's not a technicality. It's a clause. You signed it. You knew it existed." Marshall pointed at the email on my screen. "Do you understand what you've done? Archstone's already pulling out. Legal's on the phone with our board. This was our shot." I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice. "We built Argus to protect truth. That was the point. You took it and tried to sell it like it was your invention. You left my name off the pitch deck, deleted my commit history, and pretended I didn't exist. I didn't burn anything down. I just stopped you from selling what wasn't yours to sell." He scoffed, rubbed his hands down his face. "You're going to tank the company over pride." I shook my head. "This isn't about pride. If it was, I would have gone public months ago. I've stayed quiet, waited, watched. But you crossed a line, Marshall. You took something built on principle and tried to bend it for profit." His eyes flickered. There was something behind them. Anger, sure. But also the first trace of fear. "They'll crucify us," he muttered. You've made us uninvestable. I stepped forward, slowly. I didn't do this to hurt the company. I did this to protect the people who trusted Argus. The journalists, the researchers, the teachers using it to keep truth intact. You want to talk about damage? Look in the mirror. He didn't answer, just stared at the floor, breathing hard. I picked up my coffee mug, cold now, and headed for the door. Before I stepped out, I turned back one last time. You think this is about ego? It's not. It's about something you forgot a long time ago. He looked up. I met his gaze. It's about truth. And with that, I left him there, standing in his suit, in a room full of lies he no longer had the power to control. For a long time, the silence in that place had been louder than any shouting match. It was the kind of silence that came from people who knew something was wrong, but didn't want to be the one to say it first. I'd gotten used to it. I'd learned to live inside it. But after that pitch meeting fell apart, something started to shift. I noticed it first in the hallway glances, longer than usual, not hostile, not curious. Just thoughtful, like people were reconsidering what they'd accepted as truth. Then came the team meeting. Weekly check-in, same agenda, as always, same room with the flickering overhead light no one bothered to fix. Marshall wasn't there, too busy with damage control, I assumed. The new project lead ran the meeting, moving through metrics and deadlines like nothing had happened. Then Jonas raised his hand. He wasn't the loud type. In fact, I'd had to coach him early on to speak up more during code reviews. But now he cleared his throat and looked around the room before saying, "Can I ask something that's not on the agenda?" The lead hesitated, then gave a nod. "Sure, go ahead." Jonas straightened up in his chair. "I just want to understand. Why isn't Elliot's name on the ownership file for Argus? I mean, I've seen his commits. I've read his documentation. That detection model we're using? That's his, isn't it?" You could have heard a mouse breathe. A few people shifted in their seats. One guy coughed. No one answered. But Jonas didn't back down. He looked right at the project lead and said, "If we're going to call ourselves a team, then credit should mean something." Right. That was the first crack. The kind you don't fix with HR statements or a pizza party. I didn't say anything during that meeting. I didn't have to. Jonas had done something more powerful than any argument I could make. He told the truth out loud. And once that happens, you can't pretend it didn't. That afternoon, I sat down and wrote the email. It wasn't angry. I didn't name names. I didn't talk about betrayal or injustice or how it felt to watch someone else try to take ownership of my life's work. I just told the story, the way it had unfolded, who contributed what when the key components were built, and how we'd agreed on joint consent in writing before the project was ever greenlit. I attached the sign clause. No drama, just facts. Before hitting send, I added one line at the top. For everything there is a season, a time to be silent, and a time to speak. Then I wrote, "Today is that time, not to reclaim credit, but to avoid losing myself in silence." I hit send. Then I stood up, turned off my monitor, and started packing. Not in some theatrical, storm-out kind of way. Just one item at a time. A small photo frame with me and my wife from an old vacation in Oregon. A potted plant that hadn't quite died, but never fully thrived under those fluorescent lights. My notepad. My markers. The model schematic I'd kept tacked to the whiteboard like a compass pointing north. I unscrewed the board from the wall. Someone had painted over the holes once before. I figured they'd do it again. When I turned back around, I noticed something taped to my monitor. A sticky note. Light blue. It just said, "Thank you for not giving up on what's right." No name. Just handwriting I didn't recognize. That's when it hit me. Not all at once. Just this warm, unexpected weight behind the eyes. I sat down and let it come. The tears didn't feel like sadness. They felt like something old being washed away, something I'd been carrying too long without realizing how heavy it had gotten. I left the building just before sunset. The light outside had that golden slant to it, the kind you only get in Seattle for about 2 weeks a year, when the rain takes a break and lets you remember what brightness feels like. As I stepped through the glass doors for the last time, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sun hit my shoulders, and I let it. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally walking toward something that mattered. They scheduled the meeting for a Friday afternoon. Not a good sign. End-of-week meetings were where people delivered bad news and hoped the weekend would soften the blow. This one was marked as internal resolution confidential, and only 5 names were on the invite. Me, Marshall, and 3 members of the board. The conference room felt colder than usual, though maybe that was just me. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in slanted light that made the dust in the air look like static. I took my seat, no laptop, no notes, just a folder in my hands, and a memory I wasn't going to let someone else rewrite. Marshall walked in second. No blazer this time, just a fitted shirt, sleeves rolled, like he wanted to look casual, but still in charge. He didn't look at me. He sat across the table, straightened his posture, and gave the board a polite nod. One of them, a woman named Brenda, who handled risk assessment, opened the discussion. Let's keep this focused and professional. The issue at hand is the ownership and commercialization rights of Argus. We'd like to hear both sides. Marshall jumped in first. Of course he did. Argus was developed under the umbrella of Virion Dynamics, he said, calm and rehearsed. As CEO, it's my responsibility to shape our innovation into something market-ready. Elliot contributed technical components early on, absolutely. But the viability of this project, how it's structured, pitched, funded, that's where I've led. That's what turned it into a product. He paused like he expected nods. No one moved. I didn't rush to respond. I opened my folder and laid the papers on the table. Gently, deliberately. This is the original concept note I submitted 2 years ago, I said, tapping the first page. You'll see the first mention of the algorithm structure, the ethical flags for detection bias, and the proposed use for public interest safeguarding. Next, I pointed to the clause Marshall had signed, highlighted and timestamped.